Righty. Gonna kick us off. Thanks for joining us today. You are joining ARMA Madison's workshop with the Cadence Solutions team for part one of our workshop on modern record keeping with Microsoft Purview in Microsoft 365. So we're super happy to have the Cadence group with us today. We're going to introduce our presenter in a minute. But just a reminder on what you signed up for today and what we've got coming up. So this is a two-part interactive workshop where attendees will learn how to create individual retention labels in Microsoft 365 Purview, prepare your existing retention schedules for bulk upload into 365, and also apply retention rules in content within Microsoft 365. So this will be two parts today. We'll be running from 12:30 to 2 p.m. Central Time. And then we also have part two will be coming up on June 5th, where we'll be looking at automating and enhancing record keeping in Microsoft 365. So we'll be building on what we learned today. We're going to send you away with a little bit of homework. And then we'll also be providing a few resources that we'll email to registrants as well to kind of keep you going on your homework, answer some questions from today, and get you ready for part two on June 5th. So thanks again for joining us. This is hosted by the ARMA Madison chapter. Our mission is to advocate information management knowledge and practices by sharing experiences and exchanging those among our members. We're also here to provide professional development for our members, ongoing networking and education. So we're super excited to have this workshop today. It's hotly requested. We get questions about this all the time. And we know we ourselves as practitioners have these questions. So that's really where this workshop was born out of. Just a couple program housekeeping pieces. So today's program will be recorded. We're recording it now, and the link will be provided to all registrants. We will also provide the slides from Cadence and from our excellent presenter today. So you will have those provided for you after the session today. Reminder just to come in, keep your mics muted if you can. We'll turn cameras off after we get through introductions here, just to preserve everybody's bandwidth. And like myself, hopefully not get kicked off again. Nothing like getting kicked off your internet as the host here right before it starts. So we will provide time for Q&A at the end of the program. We have a little 5-minute break in the middle as well. We're planning to give you lots of information today, so we wanted to give you a little breather in between demos. So we'll have about a 5-minute break at the 45-minute mark to get logged into what we have ready for you. So just a couple reminders there. So I am going to introduce our presenter today, Soo Lee. So Soo is joining us from the Cadence Solutions group. You might have seen his name in a couple conferences if you've been around so far today or earlier this year. Cadence has done several engagements with other groups in the industry as well for providing webinars. So if you've seen Cadence or you've seen Soo, you know how good this workshop will be today. So we've got Soo's bio up there for you. He's the lead for Cadence Solutions M365 practice for the technical analysts, developers, and business analysis and solution architects. So he's spent the last few years leading and delivering SharePoint solutions with a wide range of products or projects. And he also ensures Cadence value of on time and on budget with satisfaction for clients for each of their M365 implementations. So we're super thankful to have Soo and the rest of the Cadence team on board with us here today. We've got a whole group of them monitoring the chat for your questions and answering things. And then Soo, of course, will be going through the workshop material as well. So as you get ready, Soo, to come on camera and share your screen, I'm just going to remind folks that, or let you know that there's a QR code here on the screen if you are interested in signing up for the Cadence Solutions newsletter. Please scan that code. And then we also have today's workshop pre-approved for 1.5 credits in the technology area for IGP folks who are looking for that. So your pre-approval code is there, and we can bring this slide back up at the end as well. So we are super excited to have you here. Just a reminder saying, go ahead, you can start coming on camera and kick me off the screen share. But as you're doing that, just would like to remind folks to join us again on June 5th. Same time, we will be doing part 2 of the webinar. So looking forward to that. And I think, I hope you have your teams ready. I'm sitting here in a conference room with my team and our IT folks as well. So we're ready and raring to go. So go ahead, Sang.
All right, thank you, Beth. Thank you everybody for joining today. So today's session is going to be about Purview Records Management. And before we get started, I'm just going to give you a quick introduction of Cadence Solutions and who we are. So basically, we were founded in 2013 by Jordan Uterhagen, and we have completed over 85 projects in the realms of Microsoft and OpenText and SAP. And we have migrated over 350 million documents so far, and it's increasing. So we've been at this space for over 10 years working on this kind of field, so we know what we are doing. And just the background story of how we were founded was basically Jordan, our founder, worked for a municipal government, and they hired a big logo firm to deliver a records management project. And after burning a couple hundred of thousands of dollars, after I believe like a 3 to 6 month period, the project was going nowhere. And after that, Jordan believed he could do better. And basically, he founded Cadence Solutions. And after he founded Cadence, the team grew, and we delivered many projects with our core values of on time and on budget to various clients. Now, we are a proud partner of Microsoft. We are gold partners, which were the legacy partner program. And now we are partners as Content Services Partner Program, which is a special set of partners that have access to more Microsoft resources. So we specialize in Syntex, Purview, SharePoint, Power Platform, all the Microsoft stuff that can be tailored to your solution needs. All right, so that's brief introduction about who Cadence is, and we're going to jump right into Microsoft Purview Records Management basics. So today's focus is going to be the basics of Purview Record Management, especially on the records management side. So before we get started here, let me just start a poll real quick. So this poll is going to be asking you guys how familiar you are with Microsoft Purview at the moment. And here we go. All right, I'm getting a lot of answers in. A lot of people are, that's 70, 75, 80 people have responded so far. And all right, so we got about 95 people currently responded, and out of the 95, it seems like 65 people, so 68% of people who have registered said they're beginning. So this is the first time looking into Microsoft Purview, or you kind of saw a couple demos, and there's 29 out of, so around 30% who says they're intermediate and 2% who are experts. So today's session is going to be more tailored to those on the beginner level. If you have not seen Microsoft Purview, which is great, I think now it's around 70% of you who have not seen it. So we are actually gonna go on and describe what Purview is. So Microsoft Purview is your security and compliance portal offered by Microsoft. And it provides you unified data governance solutions to help manage and govern your Microsoft M365 data. So there's multiple different branches that allows you to classify your data as sensitive data and with using sensitive info types and sensitivity labels, as well as there's capability of implementing data loss prevention policies, which are the first 3 circles here. But we're not going to focus on that for today's session. That will be more so focused on the second session, which is scheduled for June 5th. And today's more focus will be on the govern your data. So enforcing retention and deletion policies, manage records. So basically records management. This is the focus of today, and let's just quickly look at the different components that exist in Microsoft Purview. So Microsoft Purview is not just a records management tool, but it also has other features such as e-discovery, which allows you to place legal holds, and based on your different license levels, there are different e-discovery types. We do have a couple webinars on Cadence Solutions website actually regarding e-discovery on the Microsoft Purview domain. So if you guys are interested, go please take a look. And not just that, but data classification, DLP, which is data loss prevention, and information protection, those will be gone over on the second day. There's also a capability to audit and search content within your tenant as well, which is pretty useful. Now, as mentioned, today's focus is records management. So we're going to look at file plan, labels, policies, and record destruction. Now, before we go into depth with Microsoft Purview, I do want to mention the license requirements. So this is going to be our second poll and probably the last poll for the day here. But the question is, do you know which license your organization has? And the poll is up. And while that poll is going on, I am just going to stop my video to save some bandwidth. And here we go. All right, so I have around 95 people responded, with nobody on E1 and 20% on E3, 37% on E5, and 41% who do not know, and 2% others. So that said, if you do not know, it might be a good idea to, after this workshop, to get to know what kind of license you guys have, because automated records management do require an E5 license. While we can proceed with using it with E3 licenses, basically, we do not advise you to proceed with so, because when a retention label is automatically applied using metadata or other means to a document library as items, it's an E5 related service. And basically, if you have an E3 license, that is a violation of your license agreement. So for your safety, we do prefer E5 licenses and recommend highly to have E5 licenses throughout. Now, you guys probably seen there's different license types. There's the Office 365 and Microsoft 365. The main, so Office 365 is basically the Office suite with Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. What M365 is and all of that, plus an additional layer of security and machine learning features. For records management, there's only one feature that M365 adds compared to Office 365, which I will show you guys soon. But more so, if you guys do have any licensing questions or kind of need references to look at, there are links on the slide, and we will be sharing the slides after the presentation. So to look a little bit more in depth about records management licensing here, as you can see, there is a lot of limitation for E3 licenses, and E5 actually has all the features that you could want for records management and automating your records management. One difference that you see on the line here is the apply retention based on machine learning, which is trainable classifiers. That's not supported if you have an O365 E5 license, whereas if you have the M365 license, it is supported. And any kind of auto apply retention policy base is pretty much dependent on that E5 license. All right, moving on. So for today's topic, there's going to be two main goals that we want to achieve. The first goal is to transform your retention schedule to a Purview file plan. And number two is seamlessly classify records based on information architecture. Number two is really important because as we want to seamlessly classify records so that we don't want end users applying retention labels, because most end users do not know what the retention schedule is, nor will try to learn your organization's retention schedule. And if we leave it to them, it ends up them applying the wrong labels on items and items being misclassified and mislabeled. And two, honestly, if we leave it to the end users, a lot of times the end users will not apply the retention labels. So by seamlessly classifying, we mean the end users just need to use the system as their daily basis of what they do. So upload documents, if that's what they do, they just do go with that. And the retention label gets automatically applied in the back end. And that's what we are trying to achieve for this workshop today. All right, in order to achieve the two goals that we have, there are 6 different agenda items that we'll go over. Part 1, 2, and 3 is going to be a lot of enablement. It's going to be a lot of information on retention labels and label policies so that you understand what label policies and retention labels in Microsoft Purview is and what it can do. And after 1, 2, and 3 is completed, we're going to have a demo session and a short 5-minute break. And we're going to continue going over to agenda items 4, 5, and 6. Now, the first step of this agenda is to understand policy and label differences. All right, number 1, let's go into it. So in Microsoft Purview, there's the retention policy and retention label. Now, the main differences are that retention policy is applied to a location. So it's applied to a container. So you apply a retention policy to an entire site, and the end user is unaware that it has been applied. After the retention period ends, it either just deletes the document or it doesn't really do anything. And it doesn't have a capability to declare whatever has been retention policy applied as a regulatory or just a record. And it can be only based on create date and last modified date. Now, I'm not going to go over retention policies too much because whatever you can do with retention policies, you can do with retention labels plus the label policies, which I'll explain a little bit later as well. But basically, retention labels are applied to an item, whereas I said retention policy is applied to a container, so into a whole site. Retention label is actually applied to an item. And we can make it so that the end users can see or cannot see. And we can trigger a disposition review at the end of the retention period as well. And we can declare the content as a record instead of just having that retention policy apply. And we can base it on when the retention label was also labeled, so that we can leverage a certain event date to trigger an event-based retention. Now, that said, there's the retention policy and label policy. Now, I just went over what retention label is, and retention label by itself is not really active. So it starts out as an inactive state. And when you create a label policy based on that retention label, that's when that label becomes active. And you have 2 options. You either publish to a location or auto apply it to a specific location or based on a certain condition that meets it. As mentioned before, retention policy is you just apply it to a single container or a location. So there's a difference in label policy and retention policy. Label policy being combined with the retention label for usage, and retention policy just sitting on its own as its own separate tool. And it will make more sense when we go into the demo so that we can actually see the differences. Now, as mentioned, label policy has 2 different ways to be applied, either published or auto applied. When it's published, it's visible for the end users in the user interface, allowing them to actually apply it manually to an item on SharePoint Online or Teams. And auto apply will be basically the users do not really see the retention label, but it does get applied onto that item. Now, that was understanding policy and label differences. Now, I'm going to go over retention actions. So with retention action, this is what happens when the label is applied and also when the retention period is over. Now, retention action. There are multiple different types of retention actions. And the first thing is for the retention actions, we can say it so that it retains for a certain amount of time, then it does nothing. So when a document is labeled with the retention label, it is retained for a minimum of 3 years. And then once that 3-year period is over, it is no longer retained in the sense the document is still there. The users can delete it, but it does not do anything other than that. Retain forever, meaning that no one can delete that record forever. Now, then there's the retain, then delete. What this does is basically it deletes the document or an item without a review. So you can retain all team chat for executives for 2 years and then delete with no review. This can be an action that you can configure. And then there's also option to delete only. What delete only is it doesn't retain, but it deletes automatically after a certain period of time. So you can delete all Teams chat messages 30 days after they're sent, but they can be deleted earlier by an end user if they went in and deleted that chat. So it's no retaining capabilities, just deleting after a certain amount of time. Now, there's also a just label. So for retention labels, you can just use those retention labels and apply it to your items. And it doesn't really have any retaining capabilities, or it doesn't really do anything. So that's just to classify items. And we rarely use this retention labels only, but it is one of the options. So we are mentioning here on our presentation. Now, the main thing that we want to use for our retention labels is to actually retain and take action. So retain for a certain amount of time, let's say 3 years, 7 years, 5 years, whatever your organization's retention schedule meets, that after the retention period, we take action as in we launch an out-of-the-box disposition review, or we apply a different label at the end of the period. Recently, there has been a new action that was released, which is to initiate a Power Automate workflow, which allows us to actually customize the disposition review process even further. So a common scenario that a lot of people want is to launch a Power Automate flow at the end of the retention period to apply these kind of features. So run a custom disposition approval process by notifying the document owner before deletion and notifying other users, and then moving that item to a centralized archive site and generate a custom certificate of destruction. So notification emails do get sent out with current out-of-the-box disposition reviews, but there's no capabilities to move the item to a centralized archive site, nor generating a custom destruction certificate. So we can automate, using Power Automate flow, we can leverage those features to a great extent. And this was something that Cadence has been waiting for years, and it is finally released. So that's pretty awesome. Now, last but not least, we're going to talk about the different types of retention labels in Microsoft Purview. So now, number 3. So there's 3 different types of retention labels, and we cannot change the label, what type of label it is after the creation stage. So we got to make sure that we create the labels right. So the 3 different types are regular. I know I have 4 here, but the record labels are unlocked or locked state. So there's the regular label on the left-hand side, and there's the record label, which is either locked or unlocked. And then finally, there is the regulatory record label. I'll start with talking about the regular label. The regular label is deciding when you configure your retention label to retain items even if users delete. Now, what this means is that when end users delete that item that has a regular retention label applied, it gets deleted. So end users would think the document or the item is actually deleted. However, what happens in the back is it gets stored in the preservation hold library of that SharePoint site. So when it is within that preservation hold library, it will remain there until the remaining duration of its retention. And then once that retention duration period is up, it will then go into whatever the next step is, whether it's a disposition review process or power automated flow. Next, I'll talk about the record labels. So record labels is different we can mark items as record, and by doing so, users cannot delete this item anymore. So when you actually try to delete an item that has been labeled with the record label, it actually prevents you from deleting even if you are a global admin. Now, there's two different states, unlocked and locked, and I will go over the main differences of the two later down the road. But when we first apply the label, you can say that it is unlocked or locked. Now, for the regulatory record label on the left bottom hand side there, that's the most restrictive record label that we can apply. And this would actually prompt you a warning like this message right here. So you won't be able to delete this label after it's created. So it will be within your tenant forever. And also any items that has this label applied, any admins, including the global admin, won't be able to remove the label or delete the item until the retention period is over. So it truly is a regulatory record. And if you guys do want to use this feature, it is with careful caution that I would recommend to use it. And to actually look at the entire different label settings here and what they can do, here's a nice little chart here. So I'll just talk about regular labels here. Regular labels, it's basically, you can still use the item that has been labeled with the regular label, like how you would use your system daily. One thing about here on the row 3, it says delete the file is checkbox. Yes, users can delete the files. However, as I mentioned before, they are stored in the preservation hold library, meaning that until that retention period is up, those documents or those items will retain until their retention period ends. Now, for the record label, I'll explain the unlocked first and the locked afterwards. So when a record label is unlocked, the users can edit the file. They cannot delete the file as mentioned before, but they can edit the file. But one thing to note is they cannot move across containers. So if they want to move it from one SharePoint site to another, they're not able to do so when a record label is unlocked. Now, when a record label is locked, users will not be able to edit the file content. However, they will be able to move across containers. So that's the key big difference between the unlocked state and the locked state of the record labels. As for the regulatory record label, which is the far right one here, basically it restricts almost everything except for copy and moving within the container, but not across containers. So you cannot move it across sites and you can view it. But that's about it. You cannot change the retention labels or remove the retention label on it. And it is going to be there for the remainder of its document lifecycle. Now that said, there are some tenant level retention settings available as well. So you can actually set it up so that you can disable users from deleting labeled items in OneDrive or SharePoint Online. We can also restrict record versioning or restrict record properties from being updated. Also, we can customize the out-of-the-box disposition reviews, email messages, and reminders as well. All right, I know that's a lot of information that we went over in the past 30 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to dive into an environment. So it's going to be a demo session of creating a retention label. And what I would recommend you guys to do is in Chrome, go to your incognito window, or in Edge, in private window, and actually go to https compliance.microsoft.com. So when you actually go into compliance.microsoft.com, it's going to ask you to authenticate. The reason why we want you to go into incognito or in private window is for you guys to actually log in with the username and password that is given here above, instead of your own organization's account, just so you guys are logged into the correct one. Now, I'll show you guys how to actually open in private or incognito window if you are not familiar with those settings. So in Edge, Microsoft Edge, what you can do is you can click the three little dots here and click new in private window, and that would open up the in private window for you to authenticate using the account that was just shown on the presentation slide. For Chrome, let me just go to Chrome here. The incognito window looks like this, and it's basically a new three dots on the right hand side and new incognito window. Once you're there, just type compliance.microsoft.com and you should arrive at Purview Compliance Portal with the account that we have provided.
And can you pull up the slide with the login information again?
For sure. So I'll give everybody a couple minutes to log in. And once everybody's logged in, I'll kind of go over Microsoft Purview in a nutshell, then go over the records management setting.
Hey, Tyler, would you be able to drop that text in the chat for folks to copy and paste in too?
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
I might be able to do that here as well here.
Thank you.
There we go.
Awesome.
All right. Since it is in the chat window, I am going to exit out of this for a second here. And I'll start demo. So the follow along step will be, I'll explain Microsoft Purview a little bit before we do the retention label creation so that everybody has a chance to log in. But once you log in, you'll see the homepage here saying, welcome to Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. One thing to note is that you guys do have the compliance data administrator role. So you will be able to see all the settings here like I do as well. On the settings here, there's the data classification, which allows you to update your classifiers, including sensitive info type and trainable classifiers, which we will cover on day 2 of the workshop. And then also, let me go over different things. The audit tab is right here for you to actually perform audit on your tenant. Then there's the data loss prevention policies, which allows you to monitor and restrict some sensitive information from leaving your organization. So, and last but not least, there is the sensitivity labels here, as well as for you to label what kind of sensitivity your organization should apply on different items. Now, and e-discovery, can't forget that. So there's e-discovery solutions here as well. If there's the user data search standard and premium, the differences being user data search does not have a capability of having a legal hold. However, you only require an E1 license, whereas standard, you can create a legal hold, which requires E3. Premium has much more features. You can create cases, and it requires an E5 license. So it's just E1, E3, E5. And based on different levels, you can do different levels of legal holds. So that's e-discovery here. And now to the records management. So when you go to records management tab here, you're going to see an overview, file plan, label policies, on all that stuff. I just want to go with the records management setting and explain this one first. So if you go to the records management setting, as I mentioned on the previous slide before the demo slide, here, you can actually disable users to allow them to delete items from OneDrive or SharePoint Online. So you can actually enable that here. You can enable records versioning as well as allow or disallow editing of record properties. And on this disposition tab here, you can actually update what kind of email notification you'll be sending out as well, as you can see here. Now I'm just going to go back to the records management setting here. And I believe we gave everybody enough time. So we are going to go over creating a retention label. So everybody on Microsoft Purview should head on to the records management solution tab on the left-hand side. And once you're in here, click File Plan. Once you are on the File Plan tab, there should be two labels that I have pre-populated, but we're going to create a new label. So in order to create a new label, you click Create a Label. And this is how you create a retention label in Microsoft Purview. And in order for you to do so, you can put a retention label name, and you can follow along with this step, but I recommend you to put your name or some kind of a unique descriptor so that it is unique, because we can only have retention label that is that the name has to be unique for each retention label. So I'm just going to put my initial here, or actually let me put my full name. But usually what this name would be something related to your retention schedule, not something like ARMA Madison demo -Soo Lee. Now, description for users and admins are pretty much what descriptions will show up if you actually are a user or an admin based on your different roles within the organization, but I'm just going to leave it empty for now. And there are different file plan descriptors that you can enter as well. One thing to mention is the reference ID cannot be the same as your name. So make sure that that they are different, and please don't put any reference IDs when you are testing this feature out, because we don't want that conflict to happen to anybody. Now, for business function and department, you can choose what kind of information you want, and you can also add a new business function department if you wish to do so. Same goes for category, authority type, and provision/citation. So you can put all these information in as your metadata for your retention label. Now, once that is done, now we can define the label setting. And this is the setting that we saw to decide what kind of retention label it is. Or actually, it's to the actions. So the actions of what's the retention actions. So just label items, as mentioned before, you label the items with this retention label, but it's not going to do anything. So we rarely use this, or we never use this functionality. And then we either do routine items forever or for a specific period, or enforce action after a specific period. So enforce an action means that they're not retained. So when we showed you the delete only, so users can delete or the team's messages get deleted after 30 days, but users can delete before the 30 days. That's the enforce actions after a specific period, because there's no retention capabilities within this. Whereas the routine items forever or for a specific period is where we actually apply the labels as a regular or record or regulatory record label. So we're going to go with option 1, because that's actually what the retention label should be doing, retaining the items. And then once the period is up, performing the action. So select this option and click next. And then we get to define the retention period. Now, obviously, Microsoft knows records managers very well, and they default every retention period to 7 years. And it's going to be, and you do have the possibility to customize it to whatever your needs are. So if it's a 5-year, 3-year, you can just click custom year, change the years. And for demo purposes, it's always good to kind of put like 1 day so that the retention label gets used and the disposition review gets triggered fairly quickly. And then we can also define what retention period is based on. So we can base it on when items created, when items last modified, and when items were labeled. There are other event types that are out of the box, but we're not going to cover event types today, because event-based retention using these event types tend to be more heavier on the front end configuration. So we will show you guys a way to do event-based retentions with when items were labeled here. So that said, I'm just going to go with when items were. Doesn't really matter which one you go with, but just choose any of the 3 options here, not the event type ones, and click next. And now this is where we define which type of retention label it is. So if I do retain items, even if users delete, this is the regular label where items get moved to a secure location, meaning the preservation hold library. Now, when we mark item as a record, we can leave it as an unlocked state by default, or if we uncheck this, records will be locked by default. Unlocked by default, locked by default. It's your choice to choose either or. And the last setting, the regulatory record, I know we don't see it here. It should be on the bottom here, but the reason we don't see it here is in order to enable that, we have to run a couple PowerShell scripts, and we did not want any end users going in and creating a regulatory record in our demo tenant. So for that safety, you can choose whichever record type you want. I'm just going to go with the regular retention label and click next. And then finally, the choice that we have is what happens after the retention period ends. So delete items automatically would just delete it without triggering a review. Start a disposition review will actually trigger the out of the box disposition review. You can also change the label, or you can run the Power Automate flow, which allows you to customize your disposition review process. And finally, but not least, there's the deactivate retention settings, which allows you to just remove the label, and it's not deleted, but it's not retained anymore either. So the users can delete if they wanted to. You guys can choose any of the options except for the run Power Automate flow, because there's no flow within this environment. But I'm going to do a start a disposition review process here and show you guys how to create a disposition review process out of the box. So we can create by clicking that create button here, and you can have up to 5 stages of disposition reviews, and you can add multiple users per stage. But I'm just going to create one stage here, this disposition review approval stage. And then you can add yourself. You can either add users or mail enabled security groups for reviewers. And I don't have a mail enabled security group here. So I can add Denise Nguyen, which is the admin here. Or what you can do is if you type ARMA, you should see ARMA Madison, not the demo site, but just ARMA Madison. That would be this user, the test user that you guys are using. And you can select that user for the disposition review process. Click OK and click next. Once that's done, you actually see a final overview of all the retention settings that you are going to create for this retention label. And simply, you just click Create Label to create this retention label. Now, once this retention label is created, it asks you to create a label policy for this retention label, but we're not going to do anything for now because we will go over that label policy later to show you guys how to configure that. But we want to go with just do nothing for now and check the retention label. Wow. I hope nobody had any conflicts, but as you can see, we have a bunch of people creating those retention labels. And let's see if I can find mine as well here. Last modified by, there we go. There we go. Demo Soo Lee. So this way we can create retention labels, and everybody who followed along created a retention label successfully. So after this, what we're going to do is we're going to publish this label. However, before that, we are going to take a break. So everybody has 5 minutes, and we'll be back at it's 12:15 my time. So we'll be back at 12:20. So in 5 minutes. Okay.
That sounds great. And while we're sitting on that break, I might just take over the screen share and run a timer, if that sounds okay, Sang?
That's perfect. Thank you, Beth.
So will this demo site be available after this, after the session so that we can play around?
Yes, we'll make it so that it is available. There is one other component, the SharePoint site, which I'll explain a bit later. That you guys will not have access to it for now, but it will be available for you guys to go around and play around. And also, if you do have an E5 licenses within your organization, you can also deploy these sandbox tenants at no extra charge. So we'll share you guys the link for that as well.
Thank you.
And so this is a good time too, if anybody is having trouble logging in, if you want to come off mute and help. Tyler's doing a great job in the chat trying to help folks out, but if you're not able to log in and you'd like to do that, why don't you hop off mute and see if we can help you. I did also put a poll on just to let us know how you heard about the program. So we'll leave that up through the break as well. I think there was a couple of you that were having troubles logging in. So I know S. Griffin, if you wanted to hop on and we can see if we can get you in there.
Right. So I'm logging in with Edge now.
Okay.
But for some reason in Edge, when I go to the ellipses, I'm looking for the incognito.
I think in Edge it's private browsing. Do you see?
It's called, let's see. How do I get to private browsing?
You can also try on your keyboard if this is easier. If you
Okay.
hold down the control button,
Yep.
hold down the shift key, and then press N. That should open up a new window. It should be darker, it should look black, and that will be in the private browsing mode.
This is create profile.
Did that open?
Nope, it's I'm with State Patrol, everything is locked. Control Shift N gives me browsing kids mode or add a profile are the two options. This is other options.
Certain organizations, depending on your network settings, may restrict private browsing. That
Right.
could be what you're experiencing. If it's only asking you for kids mode, that's the opposite of almost what we're
Right.
trying to achieve.
So I did try in Google, but Google, I had to log into my my network in order to get out, and then I was able to do incognito, but I didn't have the options, when he's in the communications and then the record management pool drop down. I didn't have any of that, so I'll just sit tight and watch.
Yeah, sorry about that. Unfortunately, it might be your organization's network policies that's restricting you.
Yep, thank you.
Right, so just another minute and a half here. Anybody else that had any issues logging in? I know a couple of you got through. Thanks for all your help on the back there, Tyler. The recording will be available as soon as I can get the email together and get it uploaded to YouTube to send out the link. So hopefully by the middle of this week, I should have that out to folks who have registered, Sonia. And the slides will come with that. And Tyler, maybe if you wouldn't mind, once we're ready to kick back off, there were a couple questions you answered as we were going. If you want to maybe read those off and read your answers just to start off the next portion, I think that would be super helpful.
Sure, I can do that. I see we got 20 seconds left. Let me just get ready.
Good, thank you. Put you on the spot.
Yeah, that's okay. Awesome. I'll jump in here and just read off a couple of great questions from the chat as Sang gets ready to share here. This will only take a couple of moments, but so everyone's aware there was a question around the locked versus unlocked status of a record and how Depending on that status, it can be moved. So the question was, can a locked record be moved across containers if never unlocked? The answer to that is yes. Unlocking and unlocking is a state of a record, and depending on a user's permissions, they have the ability to lock or unlock. But in order to move a file across containers, it must never be unlocked. So a bit more of a technical question, but hopefully you can try that out in this test environment that Sang's been showing off. So that was one question. Another question was, do record management labels and policies conflict with MIP labels and policies? The answer to that is also no. MIP policies, they use more sensitivity labels, and that is separate configuration, but pro tip is they do play very nicely with one another. If you have MIP labels in place, you can use your RM labels to work off them. So no conflicts, and they actually improve and enhance when used together. We'll change there was the third and final question. Can you edit a label changing the retention period? The answer is yes, but you do have to be careful of what label you choose. If anything you're going to take away from today is that table that Sang had shown previously on the different types of retention labels, because there's different actions you can perform depending on the type of label it is. So if it is a regular label, meaning users can delete the files, although they're labeled, you can at any time in Purview change the retention settings. So say year end, you need to extend a retention period from 5 to 7 years. You can go ahead and do that behind the scenes, and it's going to publish to all of the files that are currently applied. So great questions. Please keep them coming in the chat. I will do my best to answer them as quickly as possible. But with that, I'm going to pass it back off to Sang.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you.
All right. So assuming that everybody should be back by now, we will start part 2 of day 1. Now, the part 2, so basically on the previous 45 minutes, we kind of looked at the retention labels and their retention actions, as well as what types of retention labels there are. Now, on the second half, we're going to now look at the 2 goals that we have mentioned. So transitioning to a Microsoft 365 file plan is the first thing that we're going to look at. And let me just go here. So goal number 1 was mapping your organization's retention schedule into a Microsoft 365 file plan. Now, how do we do this? And we will go over the steps here real quickly. So this source retention schedule is just a demo retention schedule that your organizations usually should have, something similar looking like this. Now, what Cadence Solutions we do is we provide guidance to actually transform that retention schedule to something like the CSV file, which is a retention schedule in Purview's CSV import file format. So we provide assistance in transforming your retention schedule to this new format. And once it is transformed into this format, what happens is we just click the import button and then import this retention schedule as a Purview file plan, and it is in your system. It's simple as that. And I'll just quickly show you guys the instructions and the sample CSVs and actually the upload process as well. Since this actually requires a file, this will not be a follow along demo. It will be more so I'm just going to go over what kind of documentations we provide here. So basically, we have like converting records retention and destruction schedule to Microsoft Purview file plan. So we provide documentations like this that actually give you guys the full methodology of how to convert and what the best practices are. There are documentations online on Microsoft as well, but we try to make it more so broken down so it's easier for the users to see. Now, once we follow along these steps and convert the retention schedule to a Purview file plan, it will look like something like this. So I only have 3 retention labels here: accounting general, finance general, and administration general.
You dropped your...
Hi, Sang, this is Sarah. Sorry to interrupt, but your
Yes.
screen isn't displaying.
Oh, my apologies here. There we go. Is it showing
All
up?
right, great, thank you.
All right. When did it drop? From
Just in this,
the
just when you
the demo? Got it. So thank you. So what I wanted to show is this Cadence Solutions records management transition to Purview file plan documentation, which kind of has the detailed information on how to transform your retention schedule to a Purview file plan. And once that transformation is complete, what you will see is something like this, where there is the 3 different labels: accounting, finance, and administration. And with the labels, there's different notes and as well as different retention action and schedule. So what I'm going to do right now is I am going to upload this file plan to our tenant here. So we have a bunch of retention labels here, so hopefully I will be able to see it. But if I click import here on the file plan, instead of create a label, which was what we did last time, we're going to go to import and upload a file plan. And this M365 Purview file plan import demo is the file that I was just showing you guys. And once I upload it, it has imported the 3 labels automatically. Now I'm going to click done, and I'm going to sort by last modified here so that we can see the 3 that has been imported here. Hopefully refresh one more time. There we go. Finance, administration, and accounting. So these 3 labels were created using the import process. We did not have to go over the manual creation process as we have demoed. It was just created automatically with the different types of retention schedule, retention duration, and disposition action as well. So this is something that we can help assist, and you guys are free to play around with this transformation as well. But basically, this achieves the first goal of transforming your retention schedule to a Purview file plan. Now I am gonna go back to the slides here. And now that we have gone over all the retention labels, we're gonna go over more so the settings that we have to go over on the label policy. So how to apply the labels and the policy scope. So we're gonna focus on the label application methods first, the step 5 here. And by knowing which label application method to use, we will be able to seamlessly apply retention labels to documents. And this is our goal number 2, to make sure that we have seamless records management and the end users just perform their day-to-day activities and retention labels are intact. Now, obviously, there's 3 different ways to apply retention labels. So there's 3 different types of ways we can apply retention labels. And the first one is to manually apply. But as we mentioned before, this is not the way that we recommend proceeding with. And this is not we don't really like to prefer the manual classification because it's not seamless. And we have the defaulted classification and the auto classification to make records management automated. Now, defaulted classification is going to focus more so on actually having that label set on a container level, whether it's a folder or a document library, so that we have that label assigned already, so that when the end users go in to SharePoint or Teams, uploads their document, it gets that label applied automatically, which allows seamless records management. And this actually requires only a one-time deployment, and we try to build it into the information architecture when we design information architecture with you guys. And one other thing to note is we try to use this 80% of the time, as when we try to use the automated classification around 20% of the time. One thing to quickly note about classification, defaulted classification, is the auto apply process will never override or replace the label if there is a retention label already in place for an item. So that's one thing that you guys have to keep in mind whenever setting up these retentions, these different application methods. And by applying a retention label on the container level, let's say, for instance, document library here, what's going to happen is anything underneath that document library, so folders and subfolders, any items within these folders and subfolders will inherit this retention label downwards, so that you have the correct retention applied. And I will show you guys a demo of these retention label inheritance in action as well. so that we understand how they are, how they can be used in your organization. All right, now the auto classification is harder to deploy, and we try to use it less, around 20% of our cases, but it can be used for event-based retention. That is why we do need to use auto classification. And in order to deploy auto classification, you need to know either Microsoft's keyword querying language, otherwise known as KQL, or understand the sensitive info types and other kind of ways to classify the auto classification or trigger the auto classification. So basically, an example would be we can auto apply based on content type. Let's say if content type is a contract, we set it so that when content type is contract, we auto apply that contract's retention label. So it can work better if we pair it up with metadata as well. For instance, we do the file type or the document type is a contract, and then we use a managed metadata such as expiry date and say that when the expiry date is less or equal to today, we know that it's a contract and it has expired. Now we apply the contract's retention label, which will trigger the retention. So we are using the setting when the label is applied for the retention clock to kick in. And that way we can create event-based retention. And that is where we would use the auto classification. One other thing to note for auto classification is that the auto classification does take up to 7 days for the classification to be applied. So while we will be creating those auto classification policies, I just wanted to note that we won't be able to demo it today, but once it gets triggered, we will be able to show it during our workshop day 2. Now, finally, but not least, I'm going to explain the policy scopes. Now, we looked at the different ways to apply the labels, and now this policy scopes is going to go over where to apply the labels. So retention policy and label policies. I know I only briefly mentioned retention policy in the beginning of this workshop, but basically both of them leverage what we call a policy scope. And basically there are 2 different types of scope, which allows us to apply that retention. It's the area where we can apply the retention label to. So it's the location. So there's 2 different types, adaptive and static. And I'll go over both of them here on these slides here. Okay, so static is tied to the policy itself, and you have to specify which locations to actually apply this retention label. One thing to note is that the user will have to update the policy each time if the location where we are applying the retention label changes. And that is one thing to keep in mind for static scopes. Now, for adaptive scopes, what we do is we create a separate scope outside of the retention policy or the label policy so that the scope lives separate and it is decoupled from the policy itself. So we define the scope separately outside, and it provides a flexibility, since if we apply that adaptive scope to multiple different policies, we just got to change that adaptive scope once if there needs to be a change. And once the change is made, all the retention policies or label policies will get updated with the corresponding new scope. So static scope really works well if you need to deploy the retention label to your whole organization. And whereas the adaptive scope works well if you actually want to deploy it to certain departments only and actually split it out, or even if you have a capstone retention model in place, that is where you can leverage the adaptive scopes. So now that said, we are gonna dive back into a demo. And for this demo, the create the label policies will be hands-on, so you guys can follow along. But applying the retention labels will be, I'll just show you guys how I'll be doing it, because if everybody goes in and starts uploading documents and applying retention labels, it's going to be a mess. So we will share the link to the SharePoint site and allow the users access after this session is complete. Now, that said, I'm gonna end slideshow. And we are gonna go over label policies. Now, before I go over label policies, I do want to mention scopes first. So here on the roles and scopes tab on the left-hand side, you'll see the adaptive scopes. And once you click it, you'll be able to create scopes here. Now, you guys can create your own scopes if you guys want to, but you guys don't need to follow along for this one. But it will be like something like demo scope, ARMA, Madison, demo scope, live. And once you create a scope, you can select the full directory as the unit, and you can define where the scope to publish. I'm just going to click a SharePoint site here. You can use M365 groups or users for your scopes as well. But when I click SharePoint site, it asks me what kind of site properties to use. That's why I said you guys don't have to follow along, because what I'm going to use is I'm actually going to say the site URL is equal to the demo site that I'm going to show you guys a bit later on here. So what this does is this creates a scope so that this scope is only this one SharePoint site. If I were to add multiple sites, let's say if it's for an HR department, if I add all the HR related SharePoint sites here, that can be a scope for your HR department. And this is the adaptive scope that I am showing you guys. Once you click submit, adaptive scope is created, and you can do a lot more with this. And this is the scope that I created just now. And with the scope, what I want to show you guys afterwards is I mentioned retention policies, but didn't really show you guys. So I want to show you retention policies before we see the label policies. So retention policies are in the data lifecycle management tab here in Microsoft 365. So on this tab, we have the retention policies here. And I don't have anything created now, but I'll show you how we can create one by clicking the new retention policy. And this is applying that retention without a retention label. So let's say ARMA, Madison, retention policy. As you can see, right off the bat, it doesn't even ask you what kind of retention label you want. It's just what kind of scope do you want to apply it to, static or adaptive. If I decide to go with adaptive, then I can just add the scope that I created just now from this demo, which is going to apply solely to this one SharePoint site. If I decide to go with static, what it's going to do is it's going to allow me to define the locations where I want to apply this retention policy. So it can potentially be org-wide if I just go with this setting as next. And then I can define what kind of retention period duration I want. So this is kind of similar to the setting that we saw on the retention label. However, since the retention policy does not leverage any labels, we have to define the period here. And then we do period when it starts. And we only have two options: when the items were created or last modified. So that is the only two options that we really have for retention policies. And then we can delete the items automatically or do nothing, and we do not have the option to actually trigger a Power Automate flow, or we do not have the power to actually perform a disposition review. Now, there is the retain item forever, meaning that it's not going to be deleted, and only delete items when they reach a certain age, meaning that they get deleted, but they're not retained. So all these settings we can actually mimic with the label policy. So I'm going to click next, but I'm not going to create this because once I create this, it's going to deploy to all these locations, and I do not want this retention applied here. So I just wanted to show you guys the retention policies because I did mention it. And where the label policies are is on the records management tab here. If you go to label policies, this is where the label policies live. Now, oh, I see somebody has created one. Now, this is a follow along step where you guys can create one or publish one. So there's the publish label and the auto apply label. The publish being published to a SharePoint site or a location so the user can manually apply those labels. Auto apply is that giving the KQL keyword querying language or some kind of a sensitive info type or some kind of structure so that we can know when to automatically apply the retention label. So I'm going to just publish the label here and show you guys how to publish. So if you click publish label, the first option is to actually choose the label to publish. And the label that you want to really choose is the one that you created here. We have a lot of labels. So this is mine. So I'm going to click mine. You guys can feel free to click yours when you are creating this, when you are publishing this retention label. But when I publish this one, I'm just going to click next. And I'm going to choose a scope. I can go static or adaptive, as we saw from the retention policy as well. But for this one, we are going to go with the adaptive scope. We're going to go with the adaptive. And the scope that we're going to choose for the adaptive is the one that I created live so that it applies to that site. All three scopes actually have the same configuration, so it doesn't really matter which one you kind of apply. But once you set that up, it says it's going to apply the policy to the SharePoint site. We're okay with it. We click next. We put a name for this one. So saying we publish label policy. The reason why I put my name there is we want this policy to be a unique name, and it cannot be the same name as the retention labels themselves too. So make sure that whenever you guys are creating these policies, the name has to be unique. Once that is done, I am just going to submit it. You do see an overview of what this will publish to. And when I submit it, what I'm pretty much doing is I am publishing this retention label to this ARMA Madison demo SharePoint site. Now, when I publish the label, it may take up to a couple of days, up to 7 days for the label to show up. It usually do show up a little bit less than within 7 days. Within a couple of days, it does show up, but Microsoft does say that it may take up to 7 days for your labels to show up. So if you were following along, and if you were, wow, a lot of publishing, that's good. So everybody published their label to this Madison demo site. We will be able to apply that retention label, but they might not be published yet. So when I click on a folder here and apply a retention label, I only see the 2 ones that I have staged for this workshop. But later, when we check back in a couple of days, all the retention labels that we have published to this site will be available on this apply label. Now, that said, we have the options to auto apply a label as well, which I'm just going to show you guys a configuration of it, because auto apply does require more of a understanding of the keyword querying language to configure. So let's see if I have one here. Yeah, so I'm just going to go to the edit step to show you guys the auto apply policy. Oh, this is publish. Adaptive publish. Auto apply. But the editing step actually has the same step as the creation step. So I just wanted to show you guys this, the configuration here. So you set the name, click next, and we have multiple options that we can choose from. I went with the apply label to content that contains specific word phrases or properties, leveraging that keyword querying language. But you can also configure it so that it leverages sensitive information by sensitive info here, or trainable classifiers. We will cover these in the next session, as well as other methods to automatically apply retention labels. So day 2 is going to be more so focused on that auto application. But for day 1, we want to focus on the basics, so everybody has a good basic understanding of the functionalities here. So when we select this as apply label to content based on specific word phrases or properties, we can set a certain condition up like this. So what this condition is saying, the content type has to be a document, and the document link has to be within this auto label document library site. And it's a little bit more technical, so I'm just gonna mention that we need to create this kind of a query, but once we are done, we just select the scope, You can select adaptive or static, as we have seen before with the publish label policy. And once that is done, we just click next, and we just decide which label to apply. And we submit, we review and finish. That's it. So that's the way to create an auto apply policy. And now I will show you guys, once these labels are published, how we can automatically apply them to sites. Now, obviously, what users could do manually is, let's see if I have a location where I can upload a document here. Tax forms. So what users can do is, let's say if I'm going to upload this to the auto label policy, but we have those labels published to this SharePoint site. So I'm actually going to add a column to show the retention label columns here. So I'm going to see the retention label and the label applied column and click apply. Now, you guys do not have access to the SharePoint site yet, because after the demo, we will assign that demo account a role as a member to this SharePoint site. So you will have access and play around with. But for now, demo purposes, we just want to make sure that we can show off the functionalities. So when I upload a document, I just click a document. On the right-hand side, well, actually, you got to click on the details pane if you have not. And once you click the details pane, you have the option to apply the label that was published to this site. And as we saw, there were these ARMA Madison and ARMA Madison one-day label. I'm going to apply that one-day label here. And once that's done, as you can see, you see the retention label has been applied and applied time as well. I'm just going to apply another one, actually. So that's the manual way to apply it, but we don't really want to go manually. So what we want to actually do is we want to apply the retention label on the library level. So on the library level here, right. Now that has been done. I just want to show you guys on the subfolder levels as well, or the folder levels. So if I were to organize my document library by having a tax form, and if I upload a tax form here, as you can see, it applies the ARMA Madison one-day label here. And I just want to show you that if we were to apply a label on the container level, let's say if we decide on this library level, on this folder, we decide to apply the ARMA Madison one. This is a 7-year retention, different from the one-day label. What's going to happen is any document that goes into this container folder, this contracts folder, I know I'm just uploading W2 forms, but it will actually apply the correct retention label based on the folder, not the library setting, but apply based on the folder, as you saw here. It didn't apply the ARMA Madison one-day label, it applied the ARMA Madison label on the contracts folder. So for the auto label to kick in, we will just have to wait a couple days to actually see the results for that one. But this is how we can apply labels automatically to a site and actually leverage the information architecture of your SharePoint online and automate the retention process. Now, that said, I think I am almost done. So one little piece of demo that I do want to show you is that we do not have disposition reviews just yet. We will have these kick in once in the next 2 weeks so that we actually have some items to dispose. However, I do want to show you the disposition review process in an environment that we already have a lot of these configured. So if you actually go to the records management tab and disposition here, once the items are actually pending disposal, you actually can see all the items that are on your queue to pen disposal. And you can actually click on this open in a new window to see which items are up for disposal. Now, once you are here, you can select the document that you actually want to dispose. And what you will actually see is you will see the sample. So a view of the document itself here on the right-hand pane so that you know what document you're disposing. But you can add reviewers if you decide that other people have to review this document as well, or extend your retention period, relabel it to a different retention label if necessary, or if you want to dispose it, approve disposal. It is just taking a little bit of time to load here, but as you can see here, the document is loaded so that you can actually view what you are disposing before you dispose your documents or records. And once you approve disposal, you can enter a comment why you're disposing it and apply, and then it will actually go to the disposed item list here. But I'm not going to dispose it here for today's demo purposes, but that's what's going to happen with the out of the box disposition review process. Now I am going to go back to the slide. There's only a couple more slides to finish and we are about on time. So current slide. All right. And we will make sure that you guys, this ARMA Madison account will have access to the SharePoint site, so you guys can go play around with it as well. Now, when that's one last thing that I do want to mention before we go to the Q&A session here is that the different roles and role groups within Microsoft Purview. So there is already a lot of out of the box role groups within Purview. For instance, there's the compliance data administrator where you can manage everything within the Purview compliance portal, and you do want to give that to your global admin or compliance administrator. And for records managers, you want to give them the records management role group or assign them into the records management role group so that they have all the records management capabilities under their hands. For disposition reviewers, there's no real role group out of the box, but there are disposition management role and the data classification content viewer roles. So you want to create a custom role with those two Purview roles, and then you can actually assign your disposition reviewers to those role group to use disposition. And by default, the global admin isn't granted the disposition management role. So by assigning them to the compliance data administrator, they will have that disposition management. So, but what this is saying that global admins, as if they don't have access to this, they cannot see the disposition reviews. Yeah, and I think I mentioned this point. Oh, actually, no. So basically, when you are assigned the disposition management role, you still only see items that you were assigned to review for disposition, not all the items that are up for disposition. Well, last but not least, if you want to see the full list of Purview role and role groups, there are a bunch, and it is on the link here that will be on the slide. And I did mention that you need the data classification content viewer role or assign disposition reviewer to Content Explorer Content Viewer role group. This is because in order to actually see this little preview of the document, you need this role or this role group. Otherwise, what you're going to see is error access denied. You will not actually be able to see the contents, which does not make sense if you are actually trying to dispose that item. Now, that said, that actually ends all the content for today, which I think we are almost on time. But now takeaway activities, so kind of a homework for you guys before we meet up again for day 2. So if you do not know which license your organization has, it's probably good for you to ask and know which license you guys have. It's necessary to have the E5 license. And if you actually have the E5 license within your tenant, you can set up the sandbox tenant for yourself that you can play around, similar to what we were playing around today with the ARMA Madison demo tenant. And within that tenant, try creating retention labels that actually meets your organization's need. And also try creating label policies, whether it's publish or auto-apply, and test them out and apply them to demo SharePoint sites and actually see them in action. Or if you guys do not have E5 licenses, feel free to play around with our demo environment that we have provided today. Now, that said, that ends the presentation for today and ends the workshop. Now, any questions? Any questions, I guess?
And Tyler is going to jump in too to kind of recap some of the questions he had in the chat here before we jump off for the session as well. So Tyler, if you want to run through the few that you went through, and then we should have a minute for anyone else.
Sure, I'll try to go as quickly as possible. There was some great conversations happening in the chat here. So one person asked around, why does it take 7 days for things to happen in Purview? So behind the scenes, there is a process that happens weekly, and that typically happens on Saturdays, and that is related to other Microsoft-related activities that can take up to weeks, such as indexing and crawling and publishing labels and applying labels. So unfortunately, cloud service, nothing's instant, but it does typically happen within under 7 days. There was a question, and I think we'll save this for day 2, but there is interest in seeing the destruction log and destruction certificates within Microsoft Purview, and we will absolutely touch on that. And that is a fully defensible destruction log generated by Microsoft Purview, saying which files were disposed by who and by when. A question was, what is the purpose of the upload into the Purview file plan? And the reason for that is so you do not have to manually create each and every single one of your labels. Some organizations may have 50 retention labels, some have upwards of 3, 4 to even 1,000 we've seen in the past. So by using that spreadsheet, you can bulk upload and bulk create all of your retention labels. There was a great question around retention labels and retention and policies. It is a one-to-many relationship, meaning you can have multiple retention labels grouped under one retention label policy. So if you have 5 labels, say related to a human resources site, you could publish those 5 labels underneath one policy to that human resources site. Just gonna scroll. I think that was the main ones. I see some questions here in the chat around licensing, and we're at a minute left. So I'm going to actually hand it back off to the ARMA folks to see if we have anything closing, but always Cadence's channels of communication are open.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. And thanks, Sang. I'm going to steal the screen back here for our last minute. So we hope you enjoyed today's program. I know we got a ton out of it. There was, probably for some of us more than we can digest. So I'm super glad to hear that we've got access to that demo tenant and we can be in there, and then there'll be even more to come for the next session, which again is June 5th, same time. And we will, if you registered for today, you are registered for the next session. So if you have someone else who joined you maybe in the room today, have them just go back to the ARMA Madison site to register for today, and they'll get their own link then as well. But we've got some questions that are rolling in. If you would please take a minute or two to fill out our survey, you can include some of those questions to the Cadence team in that survey as well, the survey responses. And then sign up for the Cadence Solutions newsletter for more information about upcoming workshops and other areas you can find Sang's expertise and Tyler's expertise. And then if you needed your pre-approval code for IGP credits, we have that up on the screen as well. So we are at time. So with that, we'll say thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.